Hello friends, I suggest you listen to another scary story from Reddit. At 35, I considered myself a man firmly grounded in reality. 6 years in the military had sanded away any belief in the unseen, and a decade in logistics had taught me that every problem has a logical, tangible solution. My new house was a monument to this philosophy, a 2-story colonial, solid and real, nestled in 5 acres of dense Pennsylvania woods. It was my trophy, earned through discipline and a clear-eyed view of the world. The first oddities were easy to dismiss. I'd come downstairs to find a kitchen cabinet door hanging open, or my car keys, which I religiously placed in a bowl by the door, sitting on the coffee table. I attributed it to the mental exhaustion of unpacking, a simple lapse in an otherwise disciplined routine. I was tired, not haunted. Then came the sounds, faint whispers that seemed to ride the edge of the wind. But with no neighbors for miles, there was no source. I'd stop and listen, and the sound would vanish, leaving only the ringing silence of the forest. My mind searched for explanations, old pipes contracting, the house settling, the wind in the eaves. Logic was my shield. The shield began to crack the night the smell first appeared. I was working late in my office when the air grew thick with a sharp, sterile scent, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. It was the unmistakable smell of ozone. It filled the room for a heart-stopping moment and then dissipated as if it had never been. I checked the outlets and my computer wiring, but found nothing. It was an effect without a cause, a data point that didn't fit, and it disturbed me more than any simple creak in the night. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from the previous owner, Eleanor Paris. Her handwriting was a cheerful, looping scrawl. She wrote that she was just thinking of me in that lovely old house and hoped I wasn't feeling too lonely. Then came the line that turned my unease into a cold knot in my stomach. She asked in a strangely breezy tone if her son Daniel had introduced himself yet. She explained that he had passed away in the house a few years ago and was very attached to his room, but he got lonely sometimes and loved making new friends. My skepticism warred with a primal fear. It was the rambling of an eccentric old woman, nothing more. A sick joke, perhaps. I tried to put it out of my mind, to cling to the rational world I had built for myself. I resolved to ignore the house's personalities. This, I would learn, was a grave mistake. The house did not like to be ignored. A heavy book on military history flew off a high shelf in the living room, crashing to the floor as I stood there, watching. The whispers grew more insistent, coalescing from a vague hiss into something that sounded vaguely like a sibilant, malicious voice just beyond my comprehension. The smell of ozone became a frequent visitor, a herald of its presence. My training kicked in. I treated the situation as a threat to be analyzed. I set up security cameras, but the footage would dissolve into hours of screeching static whenever I felt the presence most strongly. I left audio recorders running overnight. Listening back was terrifying. Buried deep in the white noise was a faint, high-pitched whisper. The words were unintelligible, but the angry, demanding tone was perfectly clear. I decided I would not be driven from my home. One night I sat in the living room in complete darkness, my 9mm pistol resting on the table beside me. It was a foolish comfort, a tool for a physical world against a threat that wasn't, but it was all I had. Around 3 a.m. the temperature plummeted. The air grew heavy, and the smell of ozone was so overpowering it made my eyes water. The whispers were no longer at the edge of the room. They were inside my head, a chaotic storm of hissing anger. The lights flickered and died. The only illumination came from the flickering static of the dead television screen. I glanced at it, and my heart stopped. I could see my own reflection on the dark glass, a pale silhouette on the couch. But I wasn't alone. Standing behind me was another figure. It was not the ghost of a little boy. It was a towering, emaciated shadow, a thing of disjointed limbs and a head that hung at an impossible, broken angle. As I watched, paralyzed, a long skeletal arm of pure blackness reached for me. I threw myself from the couch, spinning around to face it, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, but the soul-crushing cold of its touch lingered on my skin. The television screen cracked with a sharp bang, a spiderweb of fractures spreading from the center. And in the sudden, echoing silence, a single guttural word resonated not in the air, but in the bones of my skull. Mine. I fled. I didn't grab my keys or my wallet. I ran out into the night and drove until the sun came up, leaving my trophy, my dream, and my rational world behind me. From the sterile safety of a hotel room, I hired a private investigator, a man I'd trusted with my life overseas. I didn't tell him about ghosts. I just told him to find everything he could on Eleanor Paris and the history of that property. His report arrived a week later. It confirmed Eleanor Paris had never been married and had certainly never had a son. She was the last of a line that had owned that land for centuries. The report also detailed the house's sales history. Every 20 or 30 years it was sold. The new owners never stayed long. One family suffered a collective psychotic breakdown. Another couple simply vanished. The truth settled over me like a shroud. Eleanor wasn't a grieving mother. She was a keeper, a caretaker for some ancient, hungry entity tied to that land. She wasn't selling a house. She was providing a meal. I was meant to be the next playmate, a new source of energy for the thing she called Daniel. That night, driven by a morbid, horrified curiosity, I looked up the real estate listing for the house I had abandoned. My picture was still there, the beautiful colonial facade against the dark woods. But now, a bright red banner was slashed across the top of the image. It read, "Sale Pending."